Beneath the sunlit surface of the Aegean Sea, silence reigns. A ghost of steel lies tilted on her side, her name still faintly visible beneath a film of algae. Britannic. Few who pass over these waters realize they're crossing one of the greatest shipwrecks in history. She was the largest of her kind, the pride of an empire, and the sister of a legend. Yet today, her story drifts in obscurity. For decades, Titanic has captured the world's attention, her tragedy immortalized in film, music, and memory. Both ships were built by the same company, the White Star Line, and constructed side by side in Belfast's Harland and Wolff shipyard by the very same engineers and craftsmen. But what if the so-called unsinkable ship wasn't the end of that story? What if her younger sister, built stronger, safer, wiser, met an even stranger fate? Because this isn't the North Atlantic, this is the Aegean, where in 1916, Britannic, Titanic's forgotten sister, sank in less than an hour. No iceberg, no storm, just calm blue seas and one sudden violent blast. As divers descend through the green light and eerie quiet, they find her resting peacefully, almost untouched by time. But how did the most advanced ship in the world end up here? And why has her story been nearly erased from history? Let's dive into the depths and uncover the secret of the Britannic. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was racing toward modernity. Ocean travel wasn't just a way to cross continents. It was a symbol of power, wealth, and national pride. And in that race, two rival empires stood at the front: Britain's White Star Line and the Cunard Line. Cunard had speed, and their ships Lusitania and Mauretania ruled the Atlantic with record-breaking crossings. But White Star wanted something different. They would build ships not for haste, but for grandeur. Floating palaces that carried the rich across the sea in comfort no hotel could match. So came a bold idea. Three colossal sisters that would redefine ocean travel forever: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. Together, they would be the pride of British shipbuilding. Identical in spirit, magnificent in design, they were built side by side in Belfast, their hulls rising like mountains of steel above the shipyard skyline. For the men who worked there, it was more than labor, it was legacy. Each ship promised a new age of luxury and safety. Titanic was the centerpiece, of course, the greatest ship ever built, until the night she met the ice. Her sinking in 1912 would shatter the illusion of invincibility, but out of that disaster, another would rise, the youngest and strongest of the three. Britannic, born from the wreckage of her sister's fate, she was meant to prove humanity had learned its lesson, the ship that would never repeat history. Or so they thought, because what began as a dream of progress was about to sail straight into the heart of war. In the aftermath of the Titanic disaster, grief swept across the world like a cold tide. Governments demanded answers, shipbuilders faced scrutiny, and the White Star Line knew the public's trust had to be rebuilt, not with words but with steel. So in the same Belfast shipyard where Titanic had taken shape, engineers returned to the drawing board. This time, they would not make the same mistakes. Britannic was redesigned from keel to funnel, armed with every safety measure known to man. Her hull was fortified with a double bottom, a layer of protection against the sea's unpredictable strikes. Her watertight bulkheads were raised higher, designed to contain flooding that had doomed her sister. She carried enough lifeboats for everyone on board, a grim lesson learned from the icy Atlantic. Even her engines were improved, capable of greater power and better balance in rough waters. In every sense, Britannic was the unsinkable ship, the redemption of the White Star Line. Her completion in 1914 symbolized a second chance at perfection. The gleaming decks, the grand staircase, the opulent first-class suites all spoke of confidence, resilience, and pride. But fate had its own timing. Even before Britannic could carry a single paying passenger, the world around her erupted in chaos. By the summer of 1914, the Great War had begun. The oceans, once symbols of exploration and commerce, had turned into battlefields. Britannic would never fulfill her promise as a luxury liner. Instead, she would be reborn once again, not as a vessel of wealth but of mercy. Her fine dining rooms would become hospital wards, her elegant corridors filled with nurses instead of nobles. The ship that was built to outshine tragedy was about to sail straight into it, and as the guns of Europe thundered across the horizon, Britannic's story took a turn no one could have imagined. By the time Britannic was ready to sail, peace in Europe had already vanished. The year was 1915, and the oceans were no longer safe. Mines, submarines, and warships stalked the waters where pleasure liners once glided with champagne and music. Britannic's maiden voyage as a passenger ship was cancelled before it ever began. The British government requisitioned her for the war effort, transforming the Grand Ocean liner into His Majesty's hospital ship Britannic. Her shining white hull was repainted with massive red crosses, and a green stripe ran along her side, a signal that she carried no weapons, only the wounded. Inside, marble floors were covered with stretchers. Ballrooms became wards. The grand dining saloon, once meant for aristocrats, now echoed with the footsteps of nurses and the groans of soldiers torn from the front lines. She could carry over 3,000 patients and more than 600 medical staff, a floating hospital on the Mediterranean Sea. Despite her new purpose, there was a strange beauty to her missions. Sailing under the bright Aegean sun, the Britannic cut through calm blue waters, her white hull gleaming like a symbol of hope amidst destruction. For those aboard, she felt safe, invincible even. After all, she had been built to survive what Titanic could not, and she proved herself time and again. Voyage after voyage, Britannic carried the wounded home from Gallipoli, her crew gaining confidence with every crossing. The nurses sang, the engines hummed, and life seemed to return to the seas. But history has a way of repeating itself, sometimes cruelly, sometimes quietly. Beneath the calm surface of the Aegean, danger waited unseen. German mines had been laid across the channel she would soon traverse. The same waters that had shimmered like glass now hid a deadly trap. And so, on a calm November morning in 1916, the pride of the White Star Line set out once again. The air was still, the sea serene, a picture of peace. But within the hour, Britannic's fate would seal her place in history beside her doomed sister. Because the ocean was about to remind the world that even the mightiest ships can fall silent in minutes. It was just after 8 a.m. on November 21st, 1916, when the Britannic glided through the clear waters of the Aegean Sea. The weather was perfect. Calm skies, gentle waves, sunlight shimmering across the deck. The crew moved through their morning routines, and the nurses prepared for another run to bring home the wounded from the Eastern Front. No one imagined they were minutes from disaster. At 8:12 a.m., the sea erupted. A deafening explosion tore through the forward section of the ship, throwing men off their feet and shattering portholes across multiple decks. The shockwave reverberated through the hull, a sound so violent it was said to echo like thunder beneath the surface. Water poured in instantly through a massive gash on the starboard side. Most historians believe she struck a German mine, one of many laid in the Key Channel just weeks earlier. Others claimed it was a torpedo, but whatever the cause, the result was the same. Britannic, the largest and safest ship ever built, was fatally wounded. Captain Charles Bartlett acted fast. He ordered the watertight doors closed, hoping to contain the flooding. But unlike the Titanic, Britannic's portholes were open to let in fresh air for the patients. When the explosion came, those open windows became the ship's undoing. Water rushed in uncontrollably. The crew prepared lifeboats, but time was slipping away. Within minutes, the ship began to list sharply to starboard. Nurses and doctors scrambled to gather supplies and help one another, their white uniforms glowing eerily against the chaos. Bartlett knew he had to try to beach the ship. If he could reach the nearby island of Key, they might stand a chance. The engines roared to life, pushing the wounded liner towards shallow water, but in the confusion, some lifeboats were launched too soon. They drifted directly into the path of the still spinning propellers. In one of the most horrifying moments of the disaster, several boats were pulled under, their occupants lost instantly. Less than 55 minutes after the explosion, the Britannic, a ship longer, stronger, and safer than Titanic, slipped beneath the waves. The sea swallowed her whole, leaving only an oil-slicked calm in her wake. Of the 1,065 people on board, 30 never came back. The rest were pulled from the water, stunned that a ship so mighty could vanish so swiftly. Among the survivors was a woman who had lived through this nightmare before, a nurse named Violet Jessop. And her story would become one of the most extraordinary tales of survival in maritime history. As the Britannic disappeared beneath the surface, the survivors clung to debris, wreckage, and hope. The Aegean sun blazed overhead, casting long reflections across a sea now filled with oil, lifeboats, and broken wood. Most had escaped the sinking, but the trauma was immense. They had seen what was supposed to be the safest ship in the world destroyed in less than an hour. And among the survivors was Violet Jessop, a woman whose calm face hid an almost impossible story. She had served as a stewardess on Titanic 4 years earlier and survived that disaster. Before that, she had worked on Olympic, the first of the 3 sister ships, when it collided with a British warship and nearly sank. Now, she had been serving as a nurse aboard Britannic, 3 sister ships, 3 near-death experiences, and somehow she lived to tell them all. Jessop later wrote that when Britannic struck the mine, she calmly gathered her belongings, helped patients to safety, and boarded a lifeboat. Moments later, that very boat was sucked toward the spinning propellers. She leapt into the sea at the last second, struck her head, and blacked out. When she woke, she was floating among wreckage, alive once again. Her story became the human thread that tied the 3 ships together. The world would come to call her the unsinkable nurse, but Violet Jessop never saw herself as a hero. She saw herself as a witness, someone who had seen both the glory and the fragility of mankind's ambition. For the others, survival meant more than escape. It meant questions. How could a ship so advanced sink so quickly? Why did the safety measures fail? And how could a mine, a single unseen weapon, bring down a vessel designed to defy disaster? The answers would not come for decades, because to truly understand what happened that morning, the world would have to return to the Aegean and rediscover the Britannic herself. And when they finally did, what they found beneath the waves would leave even the experts astonished. For almost 60 years, the Britannic slept in silence. The sea claimed her gently, layer by layer, coral by coral, until she became part of the seabed itself. Fishermen in the Aegean whispered about a giant shadow beneath the water, but no one knew for certain what it was. Then, in 1975, a familiar name resurfaced: Jacques Cousteau. With his crew and cameras, Cousteau dove deep into the Key Channel. As his submersible lights pierced the dark, a vast shape emerged from the gloom, a ship so enormous that even Cousteau's team fell silent. The name on the bow confirmed it: Britannic. Unlike the Titanic, which had broken apart under the crushing pressure of the Atlantic, Britannic lay almost perfectly intact. Her bow rested gently in the sand, her propellers still visible, her decks eerily preserved. It was as if she had simply fallen asleep. Divers who've explored her since describe it as stepping into another time. The tiled corridors still stretch endlessly. The porcelain sinks still gleam beneath their coral dust. Even the grand staircase, though collapsed, can still be traced in outline, ghostly and graceful. Today, only the most skilled technical divers attempt to reach her. At 400 feet deep, she remains both a marvel and a danger, a time capsule of human ambition frozen beneath the waves. Modern sonar scans and 3D mapping continue to reveal new corners of the ship, like memories surfacing from the deep. But what's most haunting about Britannic's wreck isn't how well she's preserved. It's how quietly she rests. There are no crowds, no tourists, no memorial lights, just silence and the slow heartbeat of the sea. And yet, that silence carries a story, one of legacy, humility, and the sea's quiet revenge. More than a century has passed since Britannic slipped beneath the Aegean. Her steel is rusted, her corridors overgrown with coral, yet her story remains a mirror of human nature, bold, hopeful, and heartbreakingly fragile. She was the greatest ship ever built by the White Star Line, yet history chose to remember her sister instead. Perhaps because Titanic carried the glamour, the headlines, and the sheer scale of loss. Britannic, by contrast, sank in war, quietly, efficiently, with little drama and far fewer lives lost. But in truth, her sacrifice was no less meaningful. She carried nurses instead of nobles, wounded soldiers instead of socialites. Her decks echoed not with orchestra music, but with the cries of men being pulled from the front lines. She wasn't built to entertain, she was built to save, and in that purpose, she succeeded. She gave her life so that others could live. To divers who have seen her resting place, Britannic feels peaceful, almost content. She lies in clear water, sunlight filtering softly across her hull, as if the sea itself protects her from the noise of history. Titanic became legend, Britannic became memory, but together they remind us that even in progress there is humility, and that the ocean, in the end, always has the final word. If you've enjoyed uncovering the hidden story of Titanic's forgotten sister, take a moment to subscribe. Join us as we continue to explore the deep, where history sleeps and the ocean keeps its secrets, because somewhere below, in the quiet blue, stories like Britannic's are still waiting to be found.